They stood in the crater where the palace used to be. Charred stone rimmed the earth like broken teeth, and in the center lay the corpse of the war beast, its plated hide still smoking, still twitching, though the fire had long since gone from its lungs. Commander Ilya Voss knelt beside it, her armor shattered in 3 places, her blood drying like rust in the wind. She wasn't breathing. Not yet. Her helmet lay beside her, split down the center. Her hands rested open on her knees, palms to the sky, as if she were offering something. Around her, the dead were still being counted. Ilari and Bagrak both, strewn across the fields like discarded prayer flags. The banners were gone. No side had one. Not truly. And yet, the world was still here. So perhaps that was victory enough. I did not speak when I approached her. I was afraid that if I did, she might vanish, some dying hallucination brought on by my guilt. I stood beside her and waited. The wind whispered through the bones of the fallen. Her eyes opened slowly, glowing low like coals in snow. She said, "It's over." I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed it. Ilya turned her face to the sky. "Tell me something, scribe. When your people called for help, did they expect gods?" "No," I whispered. "We expected heroes." She closed her eyes again. "We were neither." She didn't speak again. And so I began writing. 3 weeks earlier, there was no crater, no corpses, just the scent of decay threading the palace halls, and the sound of the Bagrak war horns echoing across the horizon. We were losing, not slowly, not nobly, quickly, shamefully. The last defense ring had fallen. Our soldiers abandoned their posts to hold their families. The council was fractured. The skies were already beginning to fill with ash. I remember Counselor Harnell's voice trembling as he addressed the war room. "There is only one chance left. One final signal. It's already been sent." "To whom?" I had asked. "To Deathworlders." Even a fire stilled at that name. That night, I sat alone in the cathedral ruins beneath the old stained glass. Images of heroes past, none of whom had ever faced the Bagrak. I reread my own journals and wondered if my records would be used for anything more than eulogies. And then I saw it, a shimmer in the night sky, like a blade slicing through silk. A ship. I didn't tell the others. I went alone. It landed on the ash fields outside the city. No escorts. No fanfare. Just scorched metal hissing in the cold. The ramp opened. Out walked a woman. Ilya Voss. Not tall. Not broad. But her presence darkened the stars around her. Her armor wasn't standard issue. It looked worn, patched with different alloys, etched with names not her own. She wore no cape, no insignia, just a utility belt, 2 knives, and the weight of something ancient in her eyes. She looked at me, not as a question, but as if she already knew I would be there. "You're the one who wrote the plea," she said. I nodded, confused. "Good," she said. "Then you'll understand what comes next." Behind her emerged 3 others. A medic, pale and quiet, with trembling hands but steady eyes. A broad-shouldered engineer carrying a folding turret across his back like a cross. And finally, a synthetic, massive, slow, eyes pulsing with cyan light. It moved as if haunted. Together, they looked like survivors of a war that hadn't ended. Not warriors, wreckage. And yet, I did not fear them. Not exactly. "What do you need from us?" I asked. "Time," Ilya answered. "And belief, if you can spare it." The next days unfolded like smoke. They moved through the ruins with discipline and ritual. They never spoke unless necessary. They repurposed every broken cannon, rerouted energy grids, and turned the garden fountains into hydro traps. I watched them sleep in turns, eat sparingly, pray to no one. But they mourned in silence each time they found Ilari dead. Not with tears, with action. The people distrusted them. Whispers spread. They're demons in disguise. No one from a death world survives without cost. Some said they brought the enemy closer, that their presence was a curse. Others feared they would leave us the moment we asked too much. I feared only one thing, that they would fall before we did. And then, the last night came. The Bagrak launched a full assault before sunrise. Their vanguard breached the western gate within 20 minutes. The palace command crumbled. Generals fled. Civilians ran. All plans failed. All except one. Ilya's. She didn't ask anyone to follow her. She simply walked into the breach, knives drawn, her armor glowing with heat from overload. The others moved with her, and the city watched, some from rooftops, others from shadows, as the four of them stood alone against the tide. I remember thinking, this is not a defense. This is a burial. And yet, they did not fall. Not at once. They bent, broke, bled, but never retreated. The synthetic collapsed on a dozen enemies to buy 2 minutes. The engineer's turret caught fire, and he stayed beside it until it exploded. The medic pulled civilians from flame, even while her arm hung useless and burned. And Ilya, she danced like death was a partner she had grown used to. She reached the war beast alone, the last of the Bagrak's fury, a creature carved in nightmare. She climbed it. No fanfare, no scream, just 2 knives, and a whisper, then silence. Now, days later, we bury our dead. We count what remains. The survivors speak her name in reverent tones, and still she kneels in the crater, waiting for the world to make peace with what it took to survive. I continue to write, because Ilya asked me to, because some stories should never be forgotten, because what we asked for was help. What we got was her, and she was enough. The palace corridors smelled of retreat. Not burning, not death, not yet, but retreat, of paper maps being rolled up too quickly, of weapons left leaning against walls, of footsteps moving in the wrong direction. Ilya Voss walked through it all with the silence of someone who had long stopped expecting the world to behave otherwise. Her armor hissed with every step, patched from previous wars, each seam whispering a name. The council members stood when she entered, not from respect, but habit, the same instinct that makes prey freeze when the predator is too close. She did not sit. You asked for Deathworlders, she said. This is what it looks like. Counselor Eharnal cleared his throat, draped in ivory robes that had never seen blood. Yes, and yet the people, he paused, eyes darting to the others in the room, they speak of you with unease. There are rumors. Ilya's head tilted slightly, like a knife deciding where to land. Rumors that your team operates outside convention, that you answer to no command structure, that you kill too efficiently. Her silence tasted like steel in the air. From a far corner, a voice intervened. Perhaps you should be more concerned with how many of your own soldiers have stopped answering orders. It was Corporal Mina Rel, arms crossed, face unreadable. She had arrived beside Ilya without sound, a shadow of a shadow. We came because you called for us, not for approval. Eharnal flushed, but the conversation had already ended. They left the chamber with no farewells. Outside, wind tugged at the remnants of the city. Statues stood with cracked eyes, fountains dry as bone. The people watched the Deathworlders pass, their stares full of something older than fear, something like suspicion shaped by centuries. Ilya knew that feeling. She had seen it in 1,000 forms across 1,000 burning skies. No matter the species, they all distrusted what survived too well. At the barracks, the squad gathered. Juno Lance Holland, boy-faced and rifle-hardened, leaned against a wall, chewing synthetic bark. Beside him, Tech, the silent mechanoid, ran diagnostics on a newly installed motion turret, its 3 arms moving with surgical rhythm. And at the center, kneeling with a cloth and steady hands, was Mina cleaning a blade that no longer shined. They did not speak as Ilya entered. They never had to. The council is fracturing, she said. Some want to surrender. Others plan to abandon the city entirely. They won't run, Lance muttered. They'll hesitate until it's too late, then call us murderers when we save them anyway. No, Ilya said. They'll call us monsters. Silence. Only the turret's low hum remained, like a distant storm waiting to arrive. Mina looked up. You still want to stay? Ilya didn't answer right away. She walked to the edge of the courtyard, where the wind carried the cries of distant children and the sharp scent of electrical decay. The stars were out, but they looked brittle, as if they too had grown tired. She finally whispered, I want to leave, but I won't. Tech's head rotated. Protocol override? No, Ilya said. Something smaller. That night, they went to the edge of the city walls. Not with orders, not with ceremony, just movement, precise and invisible. The Bagrak were testing the perimeter. Scout beasts with sunken ribs and horned mouths prowled the outer sectors. Well, not too close. Lance took the shot without hesitation, the recoil echoing like an accusation. Ilya watched the beast fall, watched its body twitch once, then go still. Too far in, Mina murmured. They're pushing. They know the city's rotting, Lance said. They smell it. Let them, Ilya replied. We have work to finish. They tracked the patrol to the lower basin, where the old aqueducts converged. There, in the collapsed dome of the city's forgotten reservoir, they found the nest. 5 hounds, 2 with broken chains still clinging to their necks. A pile of remains, Ilari bodies stripped of insignia and names. Ilya knelt beside one. A girl, maybe 16. Her throat had been torn, but her hand was still closed into fists. She had fought. She had not screamed. She had died alone. Mina moved forward, but Ilya raised her hand. No, she said. I'll do it. She gathered the bodies, one by one, and laid them beneath a rusted arch. Mina found a broken harp among the rubble. Tech played it with one long digit, 3 notes imperfect and soft. Not a hymn, just a sound to carry something out of this world. When it was done, they burned the nest. Ilya stood until the last flame faded, until the bones cracked, until the smell changed from death to ash. Only then did she speak. They were children. No one came for them, Mina replied. We did, Ilya said. They returned before dawn. The council did not ask where they had gone. No one did. But that morning, someone had carved something new on the temple gate. Let in with them. The phrase spread like fire through a dry field. Whispers turned to chants. By midday, those who had planned to flee were reinforcing gates instead. The forge fires lit again. The market vendors returned. Even the sky seemed to lean closer. But not all were convinced. That afternoon, as Ilya walked through the corridor near the old shrine, a soldier stepped into her path. He was tall, Ilari, his armor worn, eyes sharp with something brittle. You think your pain earns you trust? Ilya did not answer. He stepped closer. We lost cities, worlds, children, and you think we should follow you because you survived your own apocalypse? Still silence. Say something, he spat. She did. Just 2 words. Keep walking. He swung, but the blade never landed. Mina's hand caught it midair, her own knife already unsheathed. She pressed it gently to the man's throat. No threat, just a reminder. Be grateful she speaks at all, she whispered. The soldier left, and Ilya said nothing. But that night, as she sat alone on the chapel roof beneath the tired stars, she finally allowed herself to close her eyes. Not to rest, but to remember. The sky turned the color of bruises that morning. Not storm, not sunrise, just that dense, metallic hue the old soldiers used to call the breath before the strike. Every species had a name for it. Every army feared it. In Ilari myth, it was the shade of divine betrayal. In human combat logs, it was marked as pre-engagement sky number 3, followed by casualty estimates. Ilya stood at the threshold of the command post, her gaze fixed westward. The Bagrak had begun to move, finally, fully. Their signal jammers were down. Their foot soldiers, once scattered across the perimeter, had coalesced into a single, slow-rolling tide. War drums now beat like a second pulse beneath the soil. Inside, the council was dissolving. Not officially. Officially, they argued over contingency plans, escape routes, and the logistics of surrender. But in the way a Harnell could no longer meet anyone's eyes, and in the way the guards kept checking their personal sidearms, it was clear faith had fled. Ilya turned to Tech, who stood scanning atmospheric data with uncanny calm. ETA, she asked. 17 hours before central breach. 10 before eastern perimeter collapses. 2 before desert skirmish becomes full engagement. Mina approached, her medic pack tighter than usual across her back. Her hair was tied back in a knot so tight it looked painful. They've marked civilians for evacuation, she said. Priority, nobles, religious figures, and council families. Figures, Lance muttered. loading rounds into his sidearm with quiet fury. "They want us to buy them time," Mina added, eyes on Ilya. "No," Ilya said. "They expect us to die in their place." The room fell quiet. Juno Lance Holland chuckled. "Good. Means we get to pick the battlefield." Ilya paced once, twice. Her hands brushed the blade hilts at her hips, not as a threat, but as ritual, thinking through muscle memory. She glanced at the city's schematic pinned to the wall. Concentric layers, fragile bridges, bottlenecks from older architecture long abandoned for aesthetics. "Draw them inward," she said. "Make the narrow corridors matter. No open field defense. Set collapse points at gates 7 and 9. Tech, you'll detonate if they breach. Mina, your mobile support." Lance grinned. "What about me?" "Your favorite job," Ilya replied. "Be loud." Mina hesitated. "And you?" Ilya looked back at the schematic. Her finger pressed gently against the central atrium. "I hold here." That afternoon, as citizens loaded into skycraft and children clutched wooden toys they couldn't carry, the Deathworlders began building their last stand. They didn't build walls. They built traps. They reinforced what the city had forgotten: underground tunnels, sewer choke points, a dried-out cistern re-engineered into an explosive killbox. They lit torches not for light, but for legacy. It was an old Earth tradition, fire as a signal to the lost. Rumor spread. The humans were building a weapon beneath the palace. That they carried plague bombs. That their eyes glowed before they killed. Ilya heard none of it. Or, if she did, she gave it no breath. What she did listen to was the sound of her squad. Tech humming a lullaby made from static. Lance reciting an Earth poem about stars that never fall. Mina sharpening her bone saw with surgical precision, though it was likely to be used more on soldiers than patients. And then, unexpectedly, Veron appeared. The old chronicler stood at the lip of the city's eastern wall, parchment scrolls fluttering in one hand, eyes too tired to be afraid anymore. "You're writing again," Ilya said, not unkindly. "I never stopped," Veron replied. "Only paused. For breath." They stood together for a long time, not watching each other, just the dust cloud far beyond the horizon, the one getting bigger. "You remind me of the stone wolves in the tales of Alara," he said. "The ones who did not guard the temple. They were the temple." Ilya smiled faintly. "You're a strange old man. Strange is what survives." He tilted his head. "And you? What do you want to be remembered as?" Her smile faded. "Not a symbol. Symbols get used." He nodded. "Then what?" "Just understood." Then came the scream. Not human. Not Alari. Bagrak. The scouts had arrived early. The city sirens wailed like grieving mothers. The ground vibrated, and within seconds, the first explosions ballooned at the outer perimeter. Gate 4 buckled. Smoke rushed skyward. Ilya turned. Positions. Lance kissed his rifle. Time to make bad decisions look noble. Tech moved first, dropping into the Undercity with a turbine growl. Mina kissed a pendant that had no name and vanished down the northern corridor. And Ilya, she climbed. Through crumbling stairwells, past mosaics that once glorified dead emperors, up to the highest spire of the palace. From there, she could see it all. The enemy, the civilians fleeing, the sky bleeding its last gold into black. She drew both blades, not to threaten, to remember. Her mother had given her one, her unit commander the other. Neither lived to see her earn them. She closed her eyes, inhaled, and felt the wind shift. The final assault had begun. 1,000 boots, claws, growls. The Bagrak didn't march, they devoured. And at the edge of the last bridge before the palace, Ilya stood alone. The first wave reached her. She moved like scripture, clean, fatal, remembered in rhythm. Each motion carved history into flesh. Not a frenzy, an elegy. A silent promise that if she was to be erased, she would leave no page blank. From far below, Veron watched. His hands trembled. Ink spilled across the scroll. Not from fear, from awe. And as the fire spread and the city held its breath, the chronicler began to write. Not as a historian, but as someone who had finally seen a story worth surviving. Ilya's arms ached. Her blades were dull now, not chipped, not broken, just tired. Like her. Smoke curled around her feet, crawling up the stones like it was trying to drag her down. The palace spire behind her had been half destroyed by the artillery strike an hour ago. The bodies of Bagrak's soldiers piled beneath the eastern arch, each one a dark silhouette in the growing dusk. She had not counted how many she killed. She had stopped marking the minutes. Across the courtyard, the final wave was assembling. This was not the swarm of before. These are the elites, armored in volcanic resin, eyes glowing with hatred carved from ritual and generations. At their center stood a beast taller than any wall, crowned with bone. Its claws dragged lines in the marble as it walked. It did not roar. It didn't need to. This was the one meant to finish what the war had started. Ilya adjusted her stance. "Any last words?" came Mina's voice, half static in her ear. Still breathing, Ilya whispered. That counts for something. She wasn't alone. Not truly. Somewhere below, Lance was still fighting through the maze of alleys, picking off Bagrak with the last of his explosives. Tech was likely out of charge, its last act probably shielding a family too slow to run. And Mina had stayed behind when ordered to retreat. Ilya knew because she could feel her, the way soldiers do, a gravity in the blood. The monster stepped forward. Ilya's vision blurred for a heartbeat. Her ribs throbbed from 3 earlier impacts. Her thigh was wrapped in fabric and scorched polymer. But her hands remained steady. She looked up. The stars were gone now. Just cloud and ash. So she ran. No scream. No war cry. Just motion. The creature struck first. A downward arc of bone and muscle that shattered the flagstones as she slid beneath it, blades flashing like breath caught in light. Sparks flew. She pivoted, slashed along its exposed tendon, leapt back as it howled. Not in pain, but in surprise. Her foot slipped on blood. She fell, rolled, and barely dodged the second strike that cleaved the statue of the last emperor in two. You're fading, Mina's voice whispered. Fall back. But she didn't. Not yet. The death world wasn't a place. It was a habit. You kept going. Not because it made sense, but because stopping never did. She leapt again, this time landing on the beast's back, plunging both blades into the joint where armor met hide. It reared. She held on. The world spun around her. The ground came up faster than she expected. Then, blackness. For one moment, perhaps two. Then, the sound of boots. Soft. Purposeful. She opened her eyes. Mina stood above her, rifle drawn, hands trembling from overuse. Her uniform was half-burned, and blood ran down her temple. But her aim was perfect. I told you, she muttered. Don't die where I can see it. The beast roared, lurching forward. Ilya tried to move. Her legs failed. Mina didn't flinch. She stepped forward. Not with heroism. With grief. Fired once. Then again. The round sparked off the armor. The beast barreled toward her. Ilya screamed. But the air had no sound. Then a third sound. Boom. The eastern bridge exploded. Stone and dust engulfed the battlefield. And from the smoke, Lance, carrying a detonator in one hand and dragging Tech's shattered chassis with the other. Miss me? He grinned, bleeding from the forehead. Told you I'd make noise. The explosion had shattered the creature's balance. It stumbled, legs buckling. Ilya, vision spinning, felt herself rise, half dragged, half lifted by Mina. Together, they moved. Together, they struck. Mina fired 3 more shots into the exposed flank. Ilya, limping, stabbed her last blade upward into the creature's mouth, where bone gave way to soft tissue. And it fell, not with a roar, but with silence. The kind of silence that rewrites stories. The kind you remember in dreams. Smoke drifted in all directions. The palace burned behind them. The city was still screaming in other corners. But the beast was dead. The Bagrak line, broken. The rhythm of their advance, halted, and they had done it. Just 4 of them. For ghosts who'd once been called too damaged to be trusted. Ilya sat down. Not out of weakness. Out of completion. Lance dropped beside her, slumping into the dirt. Mina followed, resting her rifle across her lap. Even Tech, its head still faintly glowing, ticked once in affirmation. Ilya looked around at her team, her family, her survivors. She didn't smile. But something softer passed through her eyes. Then came footsteps. Dozens. Hundreds. Citizens. Soldiers. Children with ash on their cheeks. They emerged slowly from alleys, rooftops, cellars. Some carried stretchers. Others carried candles. A few knelt. None spoke, until one child stepped forward. Small. Ilari. Eyes wide with both wonder and terror. She whispered, "Are you Deathworlders?" Ilya blinked. Her voice rasped. "No." A pause. She touched her chest. "We're what comes after." The wind picked up, and someone began to sing. A low, wordless tune. The kind sung over graves, over rebirths. And all around the crater, people listened. Not to mourn, but to remember. To begin again. And Ilya, bloodied and whole, closed her eyes. Not to escape, but to finally rest in a world that, just maybe, had a chance to heal. The war was over, but not gone. Peace is never clean. It doesn't arrive in banners or speeches. It comes quietly, wearing the clothes of exhaustion and grief. The kind of peace that doesn't sing but listens. For 7 days, no one moved the body of the war beast. They left it in the crater, as if unsure whether killing it had been enough. Its bones baked under twin suns. Its armor shimmered with the blood of too many species. Some said it still breathed at night, twitching in its death. Others claimed it cried. Ilya Voss said nothing. She sat on the edge of the crater, one leg bound, shoulders splinted, eyes far from here. People brought her food, which she rarely touched. Children drew her in chalk on the stone near the palace ruins, sometimes with wings, sometimes with fire. One drew her with a broken crown. She laughed at that once, not because it was wrong, because it was too close to true. The council tried to honor her. Medals, a statue commission. Ilharnal even offered citizenship, a gesture so absurd she nearly smiled. Lance turned it down on her behalf, then kicked over the plaque when no one was looking. Mina disappeared into the field hospitals, working until her fingers cracked. Tech was still offline, though the local engineers promised revival. None were sure if its consciousness would return. Ilya never asked. Instead, she walked. Slowly, stiffly, like her bones were arguing with her spirit. Through the broken sectors, past the burned temples, through the refugee camps where songs were being sung in languages that hadn't been heard in generations. The people never stopped her, but they watched how she moved without need for applause, how she sat beside the grieving and never offered comfort, only presence, how she listened when others would have spoken. It was Veruin, the old chronicler, who finally broke the silence. He found her sitting near the eastern wall one twilight, where the wind smelled faintly of citrus and char. "They are rebuilding," he said, lowering himself beside her. Ilya nodded. "They think you're waiting for orders." She said nothing. He adjusted the scroll in his lap. "Are you?" Her answer came slow, like stones sinking into water. "No." Veruin smiled. "Good. Orders end. Stories don't." He reached into his satchel and handed her a small journal. Its cover was worn, its pages half filled with sketches, fragments, names. "The city will write its own version of what happened," he said. "But this one is yours. If you want it." She took the book, touched its spine like it might crack under her fingers, then said, "What if I'm not done?" Then fill the rest. She looked out across the ruins, where children were building towers from salvaged stone and singing lullabies in unison, where old enemies sat beside each other, sharing soup, where ash still fell, but the air no longer stung. She whispered, "They'll forget us." Veruin smiled sadly. "They're supposed to, but I don't want to be remembered as a myth." "You won't," he said. "You'll be remembered as a beginning." That night, under silver starlight and the soft hush of healing wind, Ilya returned to the crater one last time. The war beast's body had been removed at last. Not burned, not buried, dismantled, piece by piece, by the people it once sought to destroy. They used its plating to reinforce homes. Its bones were carved into arches. Its heart, some said, was left untouched in the city's center, beating still. Ilya stood at the rim, journal in hand, and spoke to the memory. "We didn't win the way stories say we should. There was no cheer, no parade, no final kiss." She closed her eyes. There was only the choice to stay, to bleed when leaving would have been easier, to protect something that didn't ask to be saved, to believe, despite every reason not to. She opened the book and wrote one sentence. We came when no one else would, and we stayed when no one asked. Footsteps approached. Mina, her arms still wrapped, blood dried at the collar, but her eyes clearer now, stronger. She stood beside Ilya without speaking. After a while, Mina said, "There's talk of building something new here. A school, a coalition embassy, maybe even a peace archive." Ilya didn't respond right away. Then, "Do they want us to lead it?" "They want to name it after you." Ilya laughed once, bitter and breathless. "I don't want to be worshipped," she said. "I want to be forgotten, so they can build something better." Mina studied her, then offered a small smile. Too late. They watched the horizon for a while. Lanterns rose from the far neighborhoods, carried by wind and memory. Some bore names. Others just flickered. Then Mina asked, "If they called again, would you go?" Ilya didn't answer with words. She just began walking, away from the crater, away from the wreckage, toward the city, not as a savior, not as a Deathworlder, as a woman with no flag, no command, no certainty, but a heart that had not stopped surviving. In time, the city would heal. Children would forget the faces of war. Streets would fill with voices that did not scream. And the ones who stayed, who fought not to be remembered, but to protect, would carry something deeper than medals. They would carry meaning. And if you, reader, wander far enough, if you look beneath the stone where nothing should grow, you might still hear her voice. Not loud, not proud, just quiet and true, because some stories aren't told to entertain. They're told so we don't forget the cost of hope. So we remember that when the call came, not for warriors or gods, but simply for help, what arrived were not soldiers. What arrived were Deathworlders, and they were enough.